I'm going to go ahead with our first round of questions. The first question is for Jim. Jim, if a clinic owner could only fix one thing in their billing process to improve cash flow fast, what should it be and why?
Well, I'm going to break the rules right out of the gate. Number one, I'm going to say something about Mary real quick. Mary actually provided compliance services for my practice, Clemson Sports Medicine. I don't know if Mary remembers this.
I do.
Um, and it was probably somewhere in the realm of 1998, 99, 2000 or something like that, and really set us on the right path for compliance. So it's been a pleasure knowing Mary all these years. I'm indebted to her for getting us on the right path and from the very beginning. So
Oh,
personally, thank you very much, Mary.
thank you
Um,
so much, Jim. It's been a
you're
pleasure
welcome.
being with you.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna break the rules again. I have to say more than one. This most important. You can't pick one, but I'm gonna say two things. The first one is clean claim percentage. And there's a lot of things that go into clean claim percentage. So clean claim percentage or first pass rate. If you guys are seeing that advertised around, generally you're shooting for 95% and above. There's a lot of AI tools out there that are promoting 98, 99%. And that is a fantastic goal. I think it's very achievable. And a lot of things that entail clean claim percentage. It starts with accurate benefit verification. One of the more common denials we get is coordination of benefits. If you see something abbreviated as COB, then you want to really focus on your benefit verification. Authorizations follow right along with that. And overall is invest in your front office. You're investing in your front office, developing standard operating procedures, consistent expectations, training, management, support for your front office all leads to cleaner claims. Cleaner claim percentage out front results in faster payment and improved cash flow. Part of clean claims is credentialing. Credentialing is probably one of the biggest headaches that we have with clients. Get it done correctly the first time. And then not part of that clean claim percentage, this is where I'm gonna break the rules again, is especially now, especially January, collect patient responsibility at the time of service up front. Oh, Bree, you're on mute.
Thank you, Jim. Um, Mary, your first question is when a practice begins to feel financial pressure, where does it usually show up first?
Well, definitely, we're all probably in that boat. We're all feeling financial pressure. We've seen decrease in reimbursements. We've seen increases in prices. But when the financial pressure really hits, it almost always distorts our priorities. And unfortunately, compliance is one of the first areas that we feel the squeeze. Compliance, unfortunately, again, shifts from proactive to reactive. So instead of us being investing in prevention, education, monitoring, all those things, we kind of wait until the problem surfaces and then we have to fix it. And sometimes that costs us money in the fix. Sometimes it means we have to reimburse. So that's an issue. Corners get cut because we really are kind of forced to trim non-revenue generating roles and tasks. And what happens? Documentation time gets curtailed, or maybe you shift to AI scribing, and because you're rushed, you don't cross check the documentation output. That's an issue that puts you at risk. The internal auditing or monitoring time, again, reduced. So that means you're not finding the errors right when they happen or solving problems real time. Policies and procedures. And I know y'all all love to hear about policies and procedures. Um, we update them in our compliance bubble annually or more often. But that's a low priority. It becomes a low priority. But if you're working with out of date policies or even non existent policies, there's no way to support that you've educated staff and that you're on the correct path. Education time's reduced. We have shorter meetings. We share less information. And again, what is that? That can yield inconsistent practices. Um, we talk a little bit about patient and employee safety, privacy, and security. Again, when you rush, you start eliminating essential things, and it's so important for us to keep that at the forefront. And for those of you who have not performed a compliance risk assessment, I would encourage you to do it. That usually gets cut because it takes time. There are good tools out there to help you do that, to see if you are in line with regulatory mandates and that type of thing. Don't cut that corner. That is so very important. And we know none of these things that we're talking about are malicious. It's a survival response. But because of this, we could compromise our ability to protect the money we've earned. The little it is, we need to keep it on the table. So when we look at compliance, and it's not just billing and coding and documentation, we're looking at all of the regulatory bodies that govern us, HIPAA, OSHA, our practice acts, labor laws, all of those. We need to not condense those into, I'll get to it later. Let me give you just a quick example of what can happen. And this one is a big financial risk. If a therapist fails to correlate the codes they bill um, to the correct definition of the CPT code, and the documentation doesn't support that intervention, then we're violating multiple regulations, but in particular the False Claims Act. And it has civil fines, it can be criminal also, and you can have administrative penalties, so like exclusion from the federal government. I'm not going to go into the calculations of how this occurs, but the False Claims Act is based on the number of claims that we bill as well as the amount we were paid. And we can quickly turn, and I witnessed this early on in my compliance career, that a PT filed $25,000 worth of claims, and it resulted in over $3 million of fines and penalty. And in this particular case, they did find that the therapist intentionally and knowingly did this, and they also went to jail. So we need to know when finances get compressed that we still have to have tools in place to keep things in check.
What a great answer. And I can't make this up. Going around the treatment table, and as you guys may have seen, Greenville, South Carolina is on the news for snow. There is somebody in a snow plow right outside my office.
I love it.
So if that background noise comes into this webinar, I sincerely apologize.
Understood.
Jim, the next question is for you. What is a healthy number of days in AR for a PT or outpatient for an outpatient therapy practice?
Yeah, real common question. It's a real loaded question. Industry standard, if you look up, is generally accepted if you're going to look at measuring your AR. When you look at AR, so you look at AR in 30-day buckets, 0 to 30, 30, 60, and so on and so forth. If you're looking at an industry standard, 90 days and over is generally 15% or less. Now, when you're measuring that, you want to carve out workers' comp, attorneys, and liabilities. And that is an industry standard because those three payers dramatically skew your AR. Work comp, ballpark, depending on what it is, could be 45 days. And we know attorney and liabilities could be 2 or 3 years. So 15% or less. And we work with our clients individually because payer mix dramatically changes that, whether you're higher Medicare, Blue Cross, Blue Shield commercials, or there's a third party management group that you're having to send claims to them. A lot of variance, but that's the general sense. The other percentage I look at in AR, patient responsibility. So if you look at your aged AR, again, 30-day buckets, patient responsibility in any given 30-day bucket should be less than 10%. And again, there's probably a little recurring theme. I finished my last question with collect patient responsibility at the time of service. And if you do that, you're going to prevent that AR from catching up. Long-standing healthcare billing collection rule is if you let a patient patient responsibility walk out the door, you can kiss about 50% of it goodbye. As much as you want to send, and we do. We have solutions for our clients to bill patients electronically, the text messages and emails and all that kind of good stuff. You got to collect it straight up front. DSO is another measurement. Days sales outstanding is generally a measurement of how fast you get paid. A general rule of thumb is 30 days or less. The practices that we work that are really high functioning, they really got it dialed in, they're less than 20 in many cases. Again, payer mix varies greatly. We know Medicare, Blue Crosses are generally in that 14 days, and that does impact it, but you really can. Industry standards, again, 30 days, but you really want to dial your processes into where you're pushing down in that low 20s would be great to see.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jim. The next question is for Mary. Mary, how can an owner mitigate the risk of an audit? What billing and coding mistakes generally trigger audits?
Well, as you have heard, it's not if, it's when you're going to be audited. We see so many, we do a great deal of voluntary offsite auditing and also response to appeals and assist clients with that. And most of the time they'll say, I don't know why we do everything right. We're documenting, blah, 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 all of that. Well, what payers look at is aberrant billing and coding behavior at the claims level compared to your peers or their peers. And they're saying, yeah, but we're so different. We have more advanced patients, more complicated patients, blah, blah, blah. Doesn't make any difference. It is what it is when they look at the claim. Some audits, however, are really random, like the comprehensive error rate testing audit. You're just picked out of a bucket and the luck of the draw. Some people never experience one. We have some clients that have experienced multiple ones. If they've done it right and things are right, it doesn't haunt them, but it can open Pandora's box, that's for sure. And then one other thing, and there's such a growth of niche practices, specialty practices, whether it's in pelvic health or it's in, some other specialty area. There is a tendency to have a cluster of codes that you use that is more frequent or more frequently used than your peers. But they don't sort that out. They don't say, oh, this is a pelvic health point. That's why you see this so much. They are looking at you and your peers, your local peers, your regional peers, and your national peers. So if they see something that looks aberrant, it looks like those codes are heavily utilized more than your peers, then that sets you up for an audit. The kinds of things that we are seeing, and this is, I pulled these from last year. I was really surprised by this. KX modifier omission. And I'm going, what on earth? We know how to use the KX modifier. Well, a lot of people fail to use the Medicare Common Working File to verify previous claims filed. It could be by other therapists. Maybe they therapy hop. Maybe they're seeing a speech and language pathologist. And as you know, we share that wonderful benefit with speech and language. So if you're not checking that to see when you need to affix the KX modifier, you may subject yourself to denials. Another thing that is very prevalent, and it is a focus of Medicare for sure, and also Blue Cross Blue Shield, the early use of 97530 or therapeutic activity. And when I say early use, I mean early on in the episode of care. We have to look at the definition of that code. It is dynamic function ability, okay? So if they come in and you are coding 97530 at the very beginning, my personal expectations is it should be a short episode of care because they're already functional. This typically is a code that builds on other codes. It builds on other interventions you've used and other uh, experiences the patient needs to get to that functional independence. So I would encourage you to think twice about using 97530 early on in the episode because you're going to lead up to that to show that you've moved that patient to functionality and independence. Another thing is redundant coding, using the same codes all the time, repetitively throughout the episode of care, regardless of the diagnosis, regardless of the condition. And I know we all have our favorite codes, but some things are blatantly missing. I have personally done audits on cases where people see lower extremity conditions, a total hip, a total knee, or whatever, never once mentioned gait training. Okay, so they're strong, but they can't walk. What are we saying when we do that? What are we saying when we do the same exercises from the very beginning to the very end? And showing some variation, some intensification or reduction of exercise, those types of things. So you can see the number of units decrease. But looking at the definition of the code, you'd be surprised how many times something that you would think might be neuromuscular could be a different code based on what you actually did and documented. And this one, people, I probably have been stabbed in the back a number of times over this one. This is utilizing therapy dependent, therapist dependent codes throughout the episode of care. So I know, in my practice, we were manual therapists. We focused on the spine primarily. And, obviously we did a lot of manual therapy. We started with manual therapy, but what does it say if you're still doing manual therapy at the day of discharge? To me, it says one of two things. The patient's really not ready for discharge, or you've fallen into the trap of the patient saying, just one more time, it makes me feel so good, and it shows that you are allowing them to be dependent versus independent. So it's important to upgrade our exercises to decrease the frequency or intensity of manual therapy as we move to more functional independence. And the last one I'll touch on, and hope maybe Jim can add to this, the lack of adequate ICD-10 codes for complex cases. Again, they see a lot. The claims tells a story. It tells you how complex and involved the patient is. If you have a simple and non-complex patient and you see him for 20 visits, it might raise eyebrows. But if you have a patient who has comorbidities and other complexities that would retard or reduce the rate of recovery or slow the process down and needs to take more dates of service to get to the end accomplishment of goals, then when you have ICD-10 codes on that claim, they can say, oh my gosh, that patient's a train wreck. Surely we can certainly see it should take 20 or 30 visits. So that is something we have definitely seen to impact how they look at whether dates of service are justified.
Yeah.
Jim, have you seen that occur?
Yes, ma'am. It is very important. You're spot on, Mary. That and that actually kind of goes right into the next question Brown, I think, was going to talk about was denial rates. And
Yes.
so one of the more common reasons we see for denials is inappropriate diagnosis codes. So either not being sophisticated enough using the appropriate functional diagnosis codes, The other common thing we see in denial codes is utilizing the medical diagnosis as opposed to the
Right.
functional diagnosis. So you don't want total knee replacement. You don't want osteoarthritis of the knee. You want the medical diagnosis of abnormality of gait or whatever that functional diagnosis may be. That does directly speak to one of the more common denials. So typically we see denial rates. It's never perfect. Gosh, we wish it was, but it's just never perfect. The goal is anything about 5% or less. Again, with machine learning and AI learning and coaching, honestly, is what our team tries to do with dedicated staff that coaches staff. We try to dial that in and get your denial rates, which is kind of sort of the inverse of clean claim, not exactly, but it's really close.
Yeah.
It's a pretty good indicator. We like to see it less than 5%. It's manageable, it's workable. If we have a client that's significantly above 5%, we are actively engaging the client as to what's the plan, what's going on, what is there a commonality that's creating a recurring denial that we can correct, that we can fix. When we receive an electronic EOB, guys, y'all know this, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but when we receive an ERA, an electronic remittance, it has what's called a CARC code, and that's a denial code. So any of your EMR systems are going to categorize those as they're ingested into the system for posting. They're going to ingest those denial codes. We can rank those denial codes. Some of them are kind of general and you have to dig into the reason a little bit more. But that's an important part of what we do. It's an important part of feedback for the clients and education. And again, generally that goes, some of it's at the front office, some of it's at the clinicians. But Mary's exactly right. A lot of it relies on those diagnosis codes. Yeah.
Okay, great. Mary, next question is for you. If a practice owner wanted to quickly assess whether their core business and compliance fundamentals are solid, what should they assess regularly?
Well, everything. But, we definitely need to hone this down. And there's a couple of things I've put into the chat box. One is a link to the Office of, no, excuse me, the OIG's general compliance guidances. They updated this. The original one came out in about 1998. And we fell under the physician and small practice classification. They now have embellished this. It's so much better. It came out at the end of 23, and it is worth your while. I put a link in there. They also have carved out some guidances for small practices. And while they still expect you to comply with the 7 elements of compliance, they really have given you some latitude. When it says appoint a compliance officer, they're saying appoint a person who can be accountable and is the contact for compliance. So they have ratcheted down some requirements, but all of them are still important. But I've put this kind of in a little summary form here. We have to look at our core policies. I mean, we have some policies that are operational and are internal, but if we're core policies that deal with regulatory governance, we need to know that we follow those on a day-to-day basis. And one of the things we're talking about today is growth. So people, when you grow, you add people. When you add people, you add their perspectives. You add their previous behavior, what they've been taught, how they've been coding, billing, and documenting, all of those things. So it's critically important that they are acquainted with and educated to your current policies and that they've signed off on those and that they are complying with them, and that you give them ample opportunity to ask questions. Communication is essential. We also have compliance duties. I don't know how many of you have a compliance calendar. but there are so many things that you have to do to be compliant, and you have to be able to prove that you've done them. You have to be able to show it's documented and it's done in the timely manner as specified by the regulation. We're looking at things like, did you do your annual bloodborne pathogen education? Are you routinely checking the list of excluded individuals? While that is not required by law, the consequences of not doing it are so severe, it should be a law. Do you do your equipment calibrations? You put yourself at great risk if there is a safety hazard that has been not checked because either you're growing too fast or finances are tight. Do you look at your SDS sheets to make sure that you have any new products that you've added are properly documented and that you have those available for your staff? HIPAA audits are required, fire drills are required, safety equipments are required. There's a lot. The best way to do it is to have a calendar and to be able to check those off. And I'll give a little plug for our compliance bubble. We have all of those things in a bubble. We provide the tools to do this with, the policies to support them, and we also can monitor that by individual. So when someone has done X, Y, and Z. So it's a very useful tracking tool. Create your own if you aren't in our bubble, but it would be invaluable to make sure that you don't skip any of the essential requirements. The internal or external documentation, billing, and coding audits need to be done. I know, again, that was one of the areas that I said is often skipped when we get pushed, when we're growing extremely fast, when finances are tight. But you need to do that because there's no way to be able to identify errors. And as Jim was talking about, those denials, when you ignore a denial and you don't correct your behavior, that's a signal to the payer, I don't care. Remember, they consider that significant. So you want to make sure if you do have denials, if you have aberrant billing, that you catch that and you correct that behavior promptly and document it. Document. And when we do take that corrective action, don't say, oh, we took care of it. Make sure you document what action you took. Was it educating the staff or whatever? So go from there. And those are some key areas, certainly not all of them.
That's right. And when you document those items, your billing company is also going to love you.
Yes, they will.
Awesome. Next question for Jim. This one kind of ties right in. So, what monthly financial metrics should every owner review and how often?
Good question. There's a lot. If I had to prioritize, probably the number one metric from a financial perspective, it's not specific to billing and coding, but the number one financial metric, if you want to start looking at your practice as a whole, is it healthy, is your total labor expense as a percentage of revenue. All right. So if you want to start with your financial statement, start with that number. If for any given period of time, you can if you spit out your financial statement in an Excel spreadsheet, just add a line to the right and take your total revenue, which is your total money that you have taken in, and divide every line item by that number and get a percentage. There is variance. There's no doubt there's variance between practices with overhead, with geographies and things like that. Rule of thumb is about 60% is probably going to be about break even. The goal needs to be below 60%. Very healthy clinics are at 55% and below. I have seen very well-run clinics at 50% and less. Very profitable, but start with total labor, so that salaries, wages, benefits. Add that up as a percentage of your total revenue, and what percentage is that? So real high level financial. We've already talked about clean claim percentage. From a billing perspective, we've already talked about percentage of AR over 90 days. Operationally, the other operational metrics, obviously, you have to know your cost per visit. You have to know your total cost per visit. Obviously, it's going to vary. It's going to vary with depending what time frame you're looking at. Any metrics, particularly billing and collected metrics, if you look the smaller time frame you're looking at, if you're looking at 1 month, you're going to have outliers. You need to look at a larger time frame. Really encourage people to look at something maybe quarterly, but even annually. Look at a 12-month trend to give you a sense of it's going to change seasonally. We all know there's a season to people utilizing physical therapy. It kind of goes up and down. You have generally busy months and you have some slower months. So your cost per visit is going to change as those numerators and denominators change. But for general sense, you need to know your cost per visit. Then as you drill down, you can look at, there's a couple of ways you look at it, is basically what are your clinicians generating? You can look at straight revenue per clinician, but the other metric to look at is actually units per FTE per day, is how many charge. And from a compliance perspective, your ability, how many units can you charge in a day, is very, very practice specific. It is very dependent upon your payer mix, how much your federal payers that abide by the total time rule. It's not the 8-minute rule, it's the total time rule. How many federal payers abide by the total time rule versus how many are straight AMA CPT definition. Very individualized, but I think that's the overarching part. You start to get a little granular per practice beyond those particular metrics.
That is such great information, Jim. Thanks for those numbers.
Yes, thank you. For the next couple of questions, we're going to go a little bit more rapid fire, as we have just about 10 more minutes left, and then we're going to start our Q&A. If anybody that is attending the webinar has a question and you want to put that in the Q&A box, Mary and Jim will be answering those in the last 15 minutes of the webinar. Mary, your next question is, what are common errors owners and providers make about compliance verification?
Well, I could talk about this one forever, but I am going to be brief. Don't rely on your peers. Okay? Many, many times people will tell us, Alicia just went through this yesterday in a very long discussion with a clinician. Nobody does all of this compliance. Nobody does it that way. That's impossible to do. But they can't tell us why their peers think their method is justifiable. It's risky business because many times our peers are not totally informed. They may use unvetted resources. We look at all the Facebook, all the LinkedIn, all the different avenues that people look to for resources, relying on AI even. And I have ongoing debates with AI about compliance. So it's one of those things. But there's one other source that you don't want to rely upon, and that is on your vendors. Vendors that recommend coding for the products or supplies or whatever it is that they are selling you. Just bring to mind that, remember back when, before we had dry needling codes, vendors were recommending that we use manual therapy as for coding dry needling. And I can tell you about 90% or more of the audits that we participated in could not substantiate the justification of using that code. So I'm going to stop there, and so we can move forward and take Jim's next question.
All right, great. Thank you, Mary. Jim, what are the top 3 front desk mistakes that cost clinics the most money?
I'll make this real quick. Is not verifying benefits and patient responsibility prior to the initial evaluation. Collect all the information you can when you accept the referral. I understand it's never perfect. I understand, yeah, but I can't do this. Yeah, but I can't do that. But we don't want to live in a yeah, but world. You want to collect all the information you can, verify everything prior to when the patient gets there, write it down, tell them exactly when the patient arrives for the initial evaluation, you want to say, this is what your insurance told me. This is what they told us. Now, they may not process it that way, and many times they don't. And if they don't, come back and talk to us. We're going to help you manage this. But verify the benefits, write it down, show it to them, explain their financial responsibility to them before they see the therapist for the first evaluation. They understand what the expectation is. They agree to it. If there's a problem, then you can work through that. If there's a financial hardship, you can work through that on the front end. When they come to check out, they're already expecting to hand you money. Solve that right out of the way. That solves the issue of collecting the patient responsibility at the time of service. You've now fixed that downstream issue. And the last is everybody on your team, front desk, clinicians, all have to be aware of authorizations. It's not just the front desk jobs. It's not just the clinician's job. It's everybody's job to stay on top of authorizations, get it, and follow them, and make the patient involved. Understand it's the patient's benefits. Educate them on what their insurance requires. And we've got X number of visits. This is how it's going to work. Communicate with the patient.
Such a great point. Next question is for Mary. Mary, how do staffing decisions at the front desk and the billing level affect compliance?
Well, this one, I sat at the front office when I first started my practice to make sure I understood the idiosyncrasies of that, the multitasking requirements, what you needed to know. And I learned a whole lot. And one of the things I learned is you need to hire staff who recognize their limits and their abilities. There should not be independent decision making made by an individual who hasn't been fully educated to fulfill their duties and understand the consequences of answering questions or making decisions that are governed by regulations if they're not equipped to do it. And we deal with it all the time. We do have compliance consultation. We often deal with business office managers or business office staff or billing staff. And it is clear they do not understand many of the regulations, hence the questions they're asking. So I would encourage you to not slight that education of those individuals. I'm going to give you one quick example. I have several, but I'm going to cut it down to one. But if your front office, let's say, schedule a PTA for the 10th visit, they know if we're a Medicare patient and the attending therapist or the therapist of record is off that day, not available to do the progress report. Consequence, progress reports are due on the 10th visit. And if they're not performed or documented, then we have an issue. And that issue is that the progress report is not payable. That's 10 visits, okay? So, and to complicate it even more, they threw this into payment back and refund to Medicare into false claims. And if you do not return it within 60 days, if you were paid, you're subject to False Claims Act fines and penalties. There's a lot more. And I will leave it there, but just as a indicator of the consequences, they can be drastic.
Wow. So what you're saying there is that the front office person who's doing the scheduling, they need to know things like that, like what's due on the 10th visit, because that can dramatically impact.
Right, right. So, I mean, this happens all the time. This isn't infrequent. You know, the same thing goes for plans of care. If many people think that it's 3 times, if you try at least 3 times, then you don't need to try anymore. Well, you do, unless you're under the new referral waiver provision that went into effect last year. Plans of care must be signed. Recertifications must be signed for all, regardless of whether there's a referral or not. If not, it's a technical denial. If that's the case, then you must refund. So we could look at the whole plan of care period. 90 days worth of services. So very consequential.
That's such great information. Thank you, Mary. Jim, the next question is for you. Where are clinics most financially exposed right now without realizing it?
Good question. I approach that question from just kind of a general sense. I think having been a practice owner and been caught in the daily whirlwind of treating patients in life, it's not setting time aside to plan. I think that's where you're really exposed. You have to. If I would encourage anyone here, I'm a big believer in APTA membership, your state membership, PPS membership. There's a tremendous number of resources that can really help over time. And I'm glad I leaned on some people as I was making mistakes along the way and learning. But one thing I learned the hard way was to make time to plan, make time to work on your practice, not just in your practice. I know that sounds a little cliche, and it is, but it's so very true. Plan. You can make time to plan for compliance. You can make time to plan for clinical education. You can make time to plan for front office education, but you prioritize. You can't do it all at once, but you have to set priorities, have a goal, plan, and then you can communicate those goals to the remainder of your staff, and you can put a plan in place to actually work towards those goals. So setting a time to say plan, and again, I know clinic owners, and I talk with so many every single week. I can't because, and it's generally patient. I got to get all the patients in again. I got all the patients in again. I guarantee you that the one extra patient that you see over lunch or that you're working at the end of the day, that 1 hour of revenue is not going to offset the lack of planning for the future and coordination. You will greatly benefit from setting aside time to plan in a coordinated effort, no matter what size your organization is.
Amen.
That's great. Mary, final question for you. What systems need to be solid before a practice considers growth or expansion?
Well, the first thing I want to say is if your existing practice is compliant and has a stable foundation, you're on the right foot. If that foundation is fragile, you better clean it up before you try to start growing and adding. Uh, Again, appoint an accountable individual to help you develop and monitor and guide that expansion. You want to recognize that when you expand, you have hiring and onboarding that scales. And the more people, the more potential errors, the more need for education, the more opportunity for non-compliant behavior based on their previous perceptions or conditions. So you need to be aware of that. Obviously, policies and procedures need to be consistent to represent that growth, because you can't just keep a policy in place that was built for a small practice when you have many other things to consider. Educating the staff on your goals and objectives is key, so they'll help you with that growth. Your internal controls and audits to prevent errors and fraud. The monitoring and auditing, I can't say enough about that. And finally, looking at the quality of the growth. And if you need to take corrective action, that it is done in a timely and comprehensive fashion.
Yep.
Thank you so much. Jim, the final question for you is, can you talk about the payment trends that you're seeing here in 2026?
Sure. And I was wondering, I'm kind of monitoring some of the questions as we go. And guys, I know we're not going to get to all your questions, and some of your questions are practice specific. Would love to follow up, have an individual conversation with you. But a couple of the questions are, are you seeing this? Are you seeing that? Are you seeing this? So I thought maybe this could kind of address in general some of those questions. So I hope this helps. So in regards to trends, we are seeing, number one, we're seeing a significant increase in audits. I think Mary and Leisha and their team would agree since COVID. All that was put on hold. Since then, both the CERT audits that Mary refers to, the ADRs, additional documentation requests, audits, there's been a significant increase in audits alone. We had one question in regards to who was this? Sorry, I wanted to see who this was. Oh, it just says iPad 2. Referred to a Medicare railroad audit as educational. We're seeing that as well. Many times it's additional documentation requests, and they are auditing one code out of a whole treatment session, and then you've got to provide the documentation in the whole packet. So, yes, that is a significant trend. So everything Mary just said, and then some, is following that, and your documentation and how it meets medical necessity and how it just follows your treatment plan is going to be a tremendous help. The other thing is credentialing and re-credentialing. It's always been a headache, but guys, it has never been the headache that it is now.
Okay.
It is such a pain. There is nobody, and I'm going to preach to the choir here. There's nobody to hold the insurance companies accountable for just not doing their job in regards to credentialing. So APTA, PPS is actually doing something about it. I've been on a committee where we have drafted model legislative language. We want to try to disseminate to the states and actually push this. So there is something that tells insurance companies what parameters they have to follow with credentialing. The other is third-party administration authorization. The administrative burden under the guise of utilization management burns me up. But I will tell you the other thing I wanted, just a quick plug to let you guys know. If you're not aware, please go to the APTA, the private practice section has created a resource for you. It is called SPARC, the State Payer Advocacy Resource Consortium, SPARC. The website is, and Brianna, if you can put this in there, is sparc.apta.org. It has, thank you, that's exactly it. It has a lot of resources in there to help you talk about how to approach denials and appeals, which is a lot of what we do. How to manage administrative burden, education on MPPPR and what's going on with that. So I want you to be aware of that resource. But the trends we're seeing is credentialing as a problem. I'm telling you, get that dialed in from the very beginning when you hire your new staff, and then address authorization and coordination of benefits.
Thank you, Jim. A few things that have been dropped into the webinar chat include the resource that Mary mentioned. It is titled Compliance Fundamentals. Everybody should be able to click that PDF. I have also dropped in the chat resources for practice owners, which includes both accessing BCMS's website as well as NBC's website if you guys have any further questions, as well as joining our school community. We will go into the Q&A, and then I will provide closing remarks, and we'll wrap this thing up.
Brianna, did you put in the link to the OIG's compliance, general compliance guidances?
Give me just 1 second to make sure that I did. I believe so. Yes, I did. That is in the document titled Resources for Practice Owners. It's a Word document, and that link is in the document.
Perfect. Thank you.
Alrighty, so for our Q&A, it looks like we did have one question from Cindy. She wants to know if there's an EMR software that either of you would recommend.
We are in the throes of talking to a bunch right now. So, Jim, do you have somebody in particular?
I hear complaints equally.
Me too.
I do. Nobody's happy. And it is, I will tell you this, is changing quickly. I also will tell you from my experience, a little bit of what Mary said just a minute ago is understand when you're talking to a vendor, you're talking to a vendor. Their job is to sell you. All right. Their job is to sell you. They're going to tell you anything and everything they want to tell you to get you to sign. AI, and at that particular time, they will tell you AI can solve anything. There are challenges, particularly from a billing perspective. There are challenges with some of the newer on the market systems. I think they're very good. I think they're great. But there are challenges on the billing side because how insurance companies adjudicate claims varies greatly. And I'll give you one example.
Yep.
It's not a cookie cutter, one size fits all. Two of the challenges we have is day rate. So when you send a claim out, this will get real boring real fast. You send a claim out, you've got 97110, 140, 530, and 112. Your four core codes right there. And it comes back on a day rate and they give you one line $80, $90, $95. Where do you get for your day rate? How does the system process that, pick out that? How does your system allocate contractual adjustments so your adjustments and numbers correct based on that? So it is complicated. Long answer to a short question is no, I don't have one recommendation. I'd be happy to spitball with you sometime on the phone, but I don't know that there's one that's by far and away.
I think one thing that I've learned with dealing with various EMR companies is if they are not flexible, ditch them. You need flexibility. They need to consider the needs that the practitioners have. They can't force things. When they force things that are not regulated, they're forcing us to have to deal with more administrative burdens. And so ask questions, get questions in line. Maybe there is a source that we could use to say, what are the typical questions we should ask an EMR vendor? And how much are they willing to listen to our needs? Because I just seen some inflexibility that causes nightmares. And it's also going to create, it's going to set a standard. And if the standard exceeds what the regulation is, then we have more burden.
Thank you, Mary. I want to ask one other question. This one was a question from Julie. And can you guys answer this question? Difficulty with ICD-10 codes causing denials, which has resulted in some providers putting less ICD-10 codes to avoid the denials. Do either of you have a suggestion?
Well, what I have seen, the only place I've really seen that happen is when we're dealing with BPPB, and that is required for you to use the code associated with it. And that's the only denials that we have routinely seen. We do thousands of audits, and we're just not seeing that. What we see is the inadequate documentation of ICD-10 codes. So if she had an example of what she's talking about, that might help.
Denial codes can be payer specific, geographic specific. We see that a lot, and it comes and goes. Sometimes it drives me up a wall. It doesn't seem there's any rhyme or reason. All of a sudden we're getting denials for a code that people have been using for quite some time, and there's a policy change that was hidden somewhere. But I would encourage it. There is a website. I'll think of it, put it in the chat. It's ICD-10.com, I believe. You can look at those definitions. I would encourage you to be, in regards to codes, be as specific as you can in regards to functionality. If somebody has a left knee pain, choose left knee pain. Don't just choose knee pain. If there's an option for bilateral, choose bilateral. Don't choose left and right. But be as specific as you can. That's a general answer to your specific question, but we approach that by actually looking at the specific payer, trying to find if there's a particular policy.
You know, there
or if
were
they're
a number of MACs that did have crosswalks between ICD-10 codes and CPT codes, and that
right,
pretty much is been laid aside. However, I can't attest to that for other payers, that they haven't
right,
contrived something weird.
right. I saw a question from Jeff about downloading the practice owner's document. So yeah, it looks a little funky. Pick a folder, save it in that folder, and then go back and you'll see the document saved. And when you open the document, you'll see the links embedded in the document.
I'm going to go ahead
Is
and send
how I
that
just did
out
it.
at the end of the webinar to all
Okay.
participants so that they have it and it's easily accessible. I
Okay.
appreciate everyone's patience during this webinar. We were so excited to be able to host this for you guys, and our experts, Mary and Jim, do you have anything to say before I provide closing remarks?
I don't.
Okay.
No, thank
Great.
you all for your time. I know it's very important.
Yes, yes. Running a practice today requires more than just strong outpatient care. It requires visibility into revenue, confidence in compliance, and systems that hold up as your practice grows and reimbursement pressure continues to change. The intent of today's conversation was to help clarify where pressure tends to emerge inside a practice and what strong owners pay attention to before small issues can become expensive ones. For those of you that want to continue the conversation, we will be sharing those resources via email, as well as links to the website to work with BCMS or to work with MBC. Thank you so much for attending this webinar. And if you have any questions, we will also provide the recording of the video in our school community. Links to join the school community will be sent via email.
Very good. Thank you all. Have a good afternoon.
Thank
Good
you.
afternoon. It's been a pleasure.